it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Z.
makes me act the way I do.
This is Undead Live Afternoon Edition, reporting from the front lines of the zombie apocalypse. We have your back morning, noon, and night, whether you're dead, undead, recently deceased, or fully alive. Today is Thursday, October 15th. I'm Athena Actipus.
And I'm Dave Lundberg-Henrik, and this afternoon we will be investigating the ways the zombie apocalypse has changed human and zombie sex and sexuality.
That's right, Dave. We'll hear from experts, both zombie and human, about their biggest fears and hopes for our sexual future in the zombie apocalypse. We'll explore the links between sexiness and tattoos, and we'll also see how allergens might be contributing to the ZA.
But before that, we have an update from our newest correspondents.
Who's that, Dave?
Steve and Larry, our new film and zombie correspondents.
Are they going to talk about movies again? Because remember, we said we're going to keep it on the news.
I mean, it's, they were valuable lessons. Let's see. I say we bring them on and see what they have to say. So,
all right. Okay.
All right.
Oh, are we on? Is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
hello.
We're here. Hey, Larry. I guess they bought it, huh?
Well, yeah, I didn't feel that welcomed, but but we'll take it. We'll take it. So, hey guys, we're very excited to be on Undead Live.
Yeah, we'll leave it to you guys. Okay, take it away.
I don't know. What do you think, Fezinen?
Well, what are we going to do? Charm these folks with some more movie talk, right? We were talking about.
We can go movie talk. It's just there's some stuff going down that I think we should probably talk about. But you can try to talk about movies if you want to. I just don't know if I can ignore the things that are happening.
Well, what do you mean, dude? You're acting a little dramatic.
Can we
on live stream? What's going on?
Yeah, no, I recognize very much that I'm on the record, and actually my wife begged me not to do this thing live because she thinks I'm overreacting.
Maybe you should listen to your wife.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. If you saw some of the stuff that I'm seeing, I think that maybe you would tell me to actually not listen to my wife and instead try to protect her from what's, I think, maybe coming, because it's getting a little weird here.
Is this like that Midwest thing you were talking about before?
I don't know.
There Facebook posts about...
I'm still doubtful of the Midwest thing. In fact, I'm even doubtful of my own worries right now. But I did see something today, like literally in here, in my... I'm back home right now in suburban Boston. I'm not in my office where I was this morning. I saw something that just didn't add up to me. It didn't make sense. I'm just still trying to figure out how to make sense of it. And I can't help, like every time I try to make sense of it, I end up thinking of that crazy story of the folks in the Midwest. And I don't know what to do with it exactly. And it feels a little much closer to a movie than I'd like it to feel.
Okay, enough of that. What is it? Tell us what it is.
I don't know exactly. Let me show you. It's let me pull it up on my phone. I don't know if you guys can see that. This was like literally in my front yard. Oh yeah, I sent them a clip. Yeah, that. Yeah. What does it look like to you?
Well,
I can't. I mean.
So what do you mean your front yard? I mean, that's pretty gruesome, dude. What could that be?
Thank you. So what does my wife say? She says, "Oh, it looks like a deer got hit by something and just wandered into the yard and died." And I was thinking, no, that's never happened to us before. We live in the suburbs. Deers don't just get hit by cars, or deer don't get hit by cars and then dragged in. And second, something ate this thing. Look at it. It's like
and there's only half of it. So
right, no, something.
When a deer gets hit by a car, it's like, all there in whatever configuration. So that is a little weird.
And it wasn't there yesterday. It wasn't even there this morning when I left the house. So whatever got to this deer cleaned it clean. Like the eye sockets are open right now. So I went overboard this morning saying that we should be analytic. We should stick to the science, that we have to think rationally. I'm just trying to make sense of a half-eaten, mostly cleaned deer carcass in my front yard in suburban Boston. It doesn't add up to me.
Okay, well, should we come up with an alternative possibility and then spread it on the internet?
Sure, I'm all ears. Help me out.
Spencer, what are you thinking?
Well, so I thought about a car hitting it, but I feel like whoever hit it on my little quiet suburban street would have stopped and said, "Hey, sorry, we hit a deer," or called animal control. So then I thought, well, maybe a coyote got it, but I don't think a coyote could clean it up that much. So could it be a pack of coyotes that would clean it that much? I don't know. I mean, it ate the eyes as it did. Like it like took the eyes out of the sockets. I know anatomy well enough to know that that is a skeleton. That's not like what should be left over. So I'm not trying to sound overly agitated here, but I recognize that despite my attempt to not sound that way, I might be sounding more that way than I'd like to.
Well, the good thing is that, you know, it's obviously not a zombie because they eat humans and they eat brains, right? So we're still in a safe realm here, but it is a little bit out of the ordinary for
it is out of the ordinary. And need I remind you that until we started this meeting, nobody was even thinking that zombies are real. So for you to say it's not out of the ordinary because it's a zombie doesn't quite add up to me, given that we've never known what zombies did until today anyhow. Who's to say they don't eat animals if they can't get a hold of people? I just don't know.
That's true. We'd have to watch a lot of movies to come up with the answer.
Right, and there is like survival of the. You want
not a lot of time.
Right. So let's get back to the survival of the dead. I think they bother trying to teach the zombies to eat animals. Like they think that maybe they can like make them into livestock. So in that movie, Survival of the Dead, yeah, maybe it's part of the storyline. I don't know.
Okay, maybe we've dropped into one random Romero film.
Right, just one. Can you think of any others?
Not with the deer carcasses. So
No. I've always joked that if you need to feed a zombie, you at least need to like carry around like a chicken, like a carcass of a chicken in your backpack, but you need to heat it because most reptilian brains can sense heat. So you like throw it in the microwave, take a different microwave than you heat your like bagel in, throw it in the microwave, then take it out, and then you can feed it to the deer. I know I sound crazy. You're laughing at me. It sounds crazy. And yet
you're a Harvard professor, right? I'm the guy that makes monster movies.
Yeah, but I'm the guy who has a deer carcass in a plastic bag in his trash can out front. So I'm just saying, I guess I'm just saying.
Okay. Well, it would be funny if this is how it all began. And I don't mean to mock you because I don't want you to say I told you so, but it's still I'm reserving judgment.
Okay.
What about our hosts? Do they have an opinion about Steve's hypothesis?
I think you're laughing at me. You're laughing at me. I mean, my whole life I've wanted to be in a horror film. Now this is like a real live horror moment, and you're making fun of me.
No, it's all right. You're right. It's a horror moment. I'm not sure we've achieved the apocalypse yet, Steve, but I appreciate your unbridled enthusiasm.
All right, I think Dave wants to get in and say something here. Dave,
I gotta say, yeah, I'm kind of with Larry at this point. I feel like, even from your talk today, you were saying in movies people seem to overreact a lot of times, and now I don't know. It's a weird thing, but is it necessarily a sign of something bigger?
But I want to say, to our credit, all of us here, we address Steve's concern, because the worst thing in movies is when everyone shuts someone down before they even present their anxiety or their evidence. So we've met you halfway, Steve. We heard your case, and the jury's still out.
I feel both held and indulged by you guys. I'm going to relax about it. I think weird things happen. I'm going to call animal control. I'm sure everything's fine. I'll get back to you guys later about it. I think we'll be okay. So,
Steve, thank you. And both of you guys, I appreciate you coming on to tell us about this. It's not really what I was expecting. I thought you guys were just going to talk about movies, but I mean, it really seems like there might be something worth investigating further. So maybe we can have you back.
We'd love to come back and get back to the topic of Shocktober movies. So.
Yes.
October movies. That's so much better. But I'll think about that as I'm disposing of the carcass in the trash can. But everything
Yeah. So
All right.
news. We
Yeah.
want news.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have you back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
All right.
um,
Steve and Larry, thank you so much. Now,
yeah.
Always.
we'll see you back. Now let's get back to talking about our sexual futures in the zombie apocalypse.
That's right. Indeed, our first guest is from the future. And so this is Sarah Hill.
Yes, Sarah Hill is the author of This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, and she's joining us today to talk about the way that hormonal contraception changes our brains and behavior, sometimes in very, very surprising ways. Sarah.
Yeah. So, Sarah, where or when are you joining us from?
I know what prompted you to ask that question, Dave. It's the black turtleneck.
I mean,
And
that's
you always
clearly-
know that when somebody's wearing one of these, that they're coming from the future.
It is the
And
fashion of the future, from what
It
I've heard.
always is. And my silver vest, which is the other choice that I had to go with today, is at the cleaner. So sadly, we're just with the turtleneck. But great to be here. Although I'm here with some pretty damning news.
Oh, really?
What's going on, Sarah?
Well, it's not looking good. So I'm going to show you, because in the future we also use PowerPoints.
Sure. I mean,
In the
Something has never
future.
changed.
yeah.
No, you'd think we'd have better technology by then, but we just don't. So the world has actually it's gone to hell in a handbasket, and it's a pretty sad state of affairs. And specifically, the thing that's gone on is women have turned into sexless, depressed drones, right? And that's no way for women to be. And men no longer produce testosterone, right? So it's a weird, it's strange times that we're living in, Athena and Dave.
Wow.
Wow.
Strange
So
times.
so you're with us now from the future, and
Mhm.
you've seen actually what is in store for us, and so how did this come about? What brought about this sexless, testosterone free, drone like sexual future?
It's a really great question. And, it all started innocently enough. And it started with women taking the birth control pill, which, in your time, I'm in 2078, but you all are in 2020. And, during your time, during the past, millions of women were on hormonal contraceptives because, of course, they're a safe and effective means of preventing pregnancy. But in the future, humankind finally picked up on the fact that kids are just a huge pain in the ass and incredibly expensive. And so they decided to just stop having them altogether. So not only does this mean that humanity is doomed, because of course we're all evolutionists here, right? And so we understand that not reproducing means that, this is pretty much the end of us as a species. But we're not even going to have any fun in the meantime, because the mode of pregnancy prevention that everybody has gone to is the birth control pill. And, and the birth control pill is great at preventing pregnancy. We know that it's about 99% effective and it's safe for most women, but it does change their brains. And even though most women take hormonal contraceptives to change what their ovaries are doing, right? That is, most women go on it to prevent the release of an egg, which of course means that women can't conceive. Hormones, don't just influence the activities of the ovaries, right? As we all know, as psychologists, who study human behavior, we understand that hormones are actually part of what makes us who we are, right? So in addition to influencing whether or not we ovulate every month, they also influence everything else, right? They influence sex, they influence attraction, they influence things like hunger, how much we eat, how we regulate our emotions, how aggressive we are, learning, memory, right? Tap dancing, unicycling, you name it, hormonal involvement is probably something that's going on. And so when you change a woman's profile of sex hormones, which is what you do when you have women on hormonal contraceptives, this, of course, is going to change what their brains do. And this is exactly what, the pill does. This is how it works. So if you guys don't know anything about the way that the birth control pill works, you guys know how it works? Have any?
Sort of. I mean, yeah.
Could you explain it?
I'm glad you asked, because I do. Yeah. I've got the slide, right, and it would be completely irrelevant if you didn't want some sort of an explanation for that.
And looking at this slide, to be honest, it's not like immediately obvious as to what's going on here. So if you could break this down, I think.
I would love to, and it's actually going to change, because this here, like if you look at this right hand side, this is showing to you for a naturally cycling woman what her fluctuating levels of her two primary sex hormones, which are estradiol or estrogen and progesterone, what typical levels look like across the ovulatory cycle.
Okay, we're looking at 28 days essentially.
Yeah, we're looking at 28 days, and what you'll notice here is that you get estrogen levels are sort of higher than progesterone levels during the first half of the cycle. So like days 1 to day 14, right near ovulation, estrogen is really high, progesterone's really low, and then things kind of switch over into the other direction toward the other half of the cycle, and you get levels of progesterone being higher.
Can I ask you a question? What we're looking at right here, is this people who are on the pill or people who are not on the pill?
This is a naturally cycling, non-pill taking woman. But now I want to show you really quickly what it looks like for women who are on the birth control pill.
Well, but Sarah, so that peak with the estrogen, is that when ovulation happens?
Yeah, that is that little peak that you get there. That surge in estrogen is what prompts the egg being released and ovulation occurring. And so that's ovulation. And then right after the egg is released, you see that estrogen levels begin to fall, and then they increase later during the second half of the cycle. But progesterone is the primary or the dominant sex hormone during that half of the cycle. And so this is like a normal snapshot of, a typically ovulating woman, what you see across her 28-day cycle. But for women who take birth control pills, this gets suppressed. So all of these dynamically changing levels of estrogen and progesterone get suppressed, and instead they get replaced by synthetic versions of both hormones. And it's the same hormonal message every day, right? So rather than women having these dynamically changing levels of estrogen and progesterone, you get this same hormonal message where levels of estrogen are really low and levels of synthetic progesterone, or what's known as a progestin, are relatively high. So you can see here that women every day have a sort of higher level of synthetic progesterone relative to levels of estrogen. So this change actually ends up zombifying women's brains in really interesting ways.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we can start by talking about some of the ways that it influences things like sexual desire and attraction. Right. And so, a lot of women who go on hormonal contraceptives or hormonal birth control experience decreased libido, meaning that they want sex less, but they also can experience reduced sexual functioning, meaning that it's not only that, they don't want as much sex, is that the sex isn't as enjoyable because their body isn't responding the way that women's bodies typically respond to a sexual encounter. Right. And this is something, of course, that's not going to be good for women themselves. And it's also not going to be good for their relationships. And the reason that we get this change in women who are on hormonal contraceptives is because of the hormones that are in hormonal contraceptives. Right. So the hormones that typically facilitate the sexual response in women are testosterone and estrogen. Right. And we also know that progesterone is actually inhibitory to women's sexual desire. So it's not just that estrogen and testosterone, which tend to be higher during the first half of the cycle, right before and near ovulation, right? But progesterone is actually sort of like a libido killer.
So
it's
is it normally so you get the estrogen spike early on, so that makes women desire sex as they're leading up to the egg being released, and then once the egg's released, then it's like, I got other stuff to do
it's like look at all that, look at that laundry.
Okay.
Look at all that laundry that's piling up over there. Yeah, and there's a lot of research that indicates that right in the cycle during times when progesterone, or pardon me, when estrogen levels are relatively high, that women tend to experience increased sexual desire relative to what they experience during other points in the cycle. And that progesterone does, in fact, seem to have an inhibitory effect on women's sex hormones in ways, again, that make women less inclined to engage in sexual activity during times when progesterone is dominant. And of course, when you take the birth control pill, and every day you're getting that signal of relatively high levels of progesterone, or progestin, since it's a synthetic, and low levels of estrogen. And testosterone, by the way, is also something that gets reduced on hormonal contraceptives because women's bodies start producing what's known as sex hormone binding globulins. And this actually sucks up the testosterone and makes it unusable by the body. So essentially the birth control pill is just like sucking all the sexual desire out of women, just like one hormonal change at a time, leading to the zombification of women's sexual desire.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull this comment in from Diana right now because it's right on point. She's asking whether maybe there's sort of a conceiving sexuality and an affiliating sexuality that are overlapping perhaps in the luteal phase, but distinguishable in some way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I have not read any research that has looked at that issue specifically, but I would love to see some research that teased those things apart, right? Because that's really what we need to know. We need to better understand women's naturally varying hormonal changes and how they influence psychology and behavior. I mean, we also need to know the way that hormonal birth control then influences women's sexual responses and behaviors.
What is the conceiving and affiliative sexuality? So that's like sexuality designed to have a baby versus sexuality designed to maintain a relationship? Those two terms that Diana just mentioned?
Well, no, because I was just pretending to know what they were, so I would sound smart.
Oh, okay.
But I'm assuming that affiliative, that it is sort of the glue of the relationship, sort of, kinds of sex, because we have sex for lots of different reasons, right? We have sex because we feel really a lot of sexual desire. We have sex, which is, sort of that follicular phase, periovulatory period sex, where you just like really want it and somebody is sexy and you feel like having sex. But sometimes we also have sex for other things, like we want to feel close to our partner, right? Or we need a ride to the airport and this guy has a car. Yeah, no, that was a long 2 hours. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Like I was in hard shape. When Uber goes on strike, watch out. just like watch out.
So let me ask, beyond how this is affecting the Uber industry, how is the pill affecting relationships?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And, there's something this is something that just hasn't been looked at all that much. There's some research that seems to suggest that hormonal birth control can influence who women are attracted to. And of course, this is going to be something that can then influence the quality of their relationships if they end up changing their hormonal profile within the context of the relationship. So, there's been a lot of research into the role that women's sex hormones play in terms of mate attraction. And in one of my favorite studies of this is something that my friend Jim Roney and one of his graduate students did, where it was a really carefully controlled study where they collected saliva samples from individual women across a couple of different cycles. And they took these measures every other day. So it was like a really robust, really nicely done study. And they looked at women's own sex hormones and then how that influenced their preference for testosterone markers in men. And what they found was that women's levels of estrogen, which you see here with the dashed lines, really neatly predict the levels of testosterone that they prefer in the faces of men, right? And so this just suggests that the sex hormone estrogen seems to be increasing attunement to cues that are associated with testosterone presence. And what this means, of course, is that when you're on hormonal birth control, which keeps estrogen levels really low, and therefore potentially minimizes these shifts. It would lead to the prediction that women who are on hormonal contraceptives might prefer men with somewhat less masculine faces relative to what's preferred by women who are naturally cycling. And there's been some research that's consistent with this hypothesis. So you can't really tell that, like, these two faces look very similar, but the face on the right actually has more cues to facial. He's got a little bit of a wider jaw. He's got deeper set eyes. I mean, these are some features that we know are associated with higher levels of testosterone. I mean, there's been research showing that the average face preferred by women when they're naturally cycling is somewhat more masculine than the face that they prefer when they're on hormonal birth control. And they've also looked at the faces of partners chosen by women who are on or off of hormonal contraceptives and found that the faces were actually less masculine. The pill takers' partners' faces were less masculine than were the naturally cycling women's partners. And again, this is very provocative, and we need to see more research before we can make too broad of strokes in it. But I can tell you that from the future, where I'm coming from, right, where I have this, I see and I know what goes on, it does seem that it is influencing the nature of the zombification of humanity. But that's not all, right? So women, in addition to having their, changing of their sex drive and also their mate preferences, they're also having their moods zombified. And there's been a lot of research indicating that mood-related side effects are very common for women who are on hormonal contraceptives. And in fact, about half of women who start hormonal contraception go off of it. And the most common reason that women go off of it soon after starting is because of mood-related side effects. And in particular, we tend to see that for some women, that it can really increase the risk of depression and anxiety. And just to show you some a little table here, which I think is a good one. This is taken from a study that was done in Denmark. And what's really cool about these studies that they do over there is that they're able to use their public health registry data. And this is where they're actually able to look at the whole population of Denmark. And so these data were taken from all the women living in Denmark aged 15 to 40. And what they did is they compared the rate of depression diagnoses and anxiety diagnoses of women who were prescribed hormonal contraceptives or who weren't, right? And then they just looked at what is the increased risk, what is the percent increased risk of depression among the group that was first or previously prescribed hormonal birth control. And what you can see is that for the increased risk of developing depression or anxiety is pretty substantial for women who are on hormonal contraceptives relative to what it is to women who are not on hormonal contraceptives. And this is particularly true for really young women. So for adolescent women, like ages 15 to 19, these particular zombification side effects are particularly pronounced, meaning that this group is more vulnerable than women once they're 20 and older. So this is something to be aware of. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about this? So,
yeah.
I want to bring that graph back up. When we see the 50%, does that mean it's half the so for the vaginal ring is it 50%? Is that half of when they're not on contraceptive, or is that an additional half?
No, it's an additional half. So the way to read this is what is the percent increased risk of depression of women on this type of hormonal birth control relative to women who are not on hormonal birth control.
So essentially, women on IUDs would be almost 3 times as high, women
yes.
15 to 19. Interesting.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is really important stuff. And this is particularly important for mothers who have daughters, because I know that a lot of doctors' offices will prescribe for their daughters birth control for things like acne or, uncomfortable periods or, trying to get their cycles regulated. And when you do that, you should be very aware the heightened risk of depression and anxiety in this group, because this also subsequent research found that this is also associated with an increased risk of suicide that's particularly high in these adolescent girls. And so this is something that I think is really important that people understand. So if they do choose to be on hormonal birth control, they can have somebody keeping an eye on them to make sure that they're not sort of slipping into a depressive state that could end up having really devastating consequences. So why does this happen, right? Why do women get zombified this way? Well, it turns out that progesterone, like the stuff that our bodies actually make, not the stuff that we get in birth control pills, actually has, when it gets broken down in the body, it releases this calming metabolite called allopregnanolone. And allopregnanolone increases GABAergic activity in our brain. And GABA is a neurotransmitter that it's the neurotransmitter system that gets sort of activated in response to like sitting by the fire and chilling out, or like having a glass of wine. Like alcohol actually increases GABAergic activity in the brain, which is why having a glass of wine feels so relaxing. And so does this neurotransmitter. Allopregnanolone actually has the same types of effects as a glass of wine, but without any calories or addictive potential. It's like amazing stuff. And so women who are on hormonal birth control, because the progestins that are in the pill don't break down and metabolize the same way and don't release this calming metabolite, it's believed the current wisdom is that one of the main reasons that we get this sort of a zombification effect is because the levels of allopregnanolone in pill takers is substantially lower than naturally cycling women across the cycle. So even during periods of the cycle when a natural cycler isn't releasing high levels of progesterone, their levels of allopregnanolone are still substantially higher than pill-taking women's. And so they think that this is one of the reasons that women can get really anxious and then depressed, is because their brain is getting less GABAergic activity, and it's like literally less able to calm itself down.
Okay, so you're saying when you're on the pill, you're not getting the thing that gives you the feeling of being at the fire as much? Okay, but then, interesting. And so then when you're not on the pill, you sort of get these, and then do you get those sort of Zen moments throughout the month, or are they just at certain points in the cycle, or
great question. So the levels are higher during the luteal phase of the cycle when you're actually actively producing high levels of progesterone and is being metabolized. And so your levels of allopregnanolone and that GABAergic activity in your brain is going to be higher during that point in the cycle than earlier points in the cycle, which is also why women report feeling because some women get PMS, which is I could give a whole other zombification talk on that. But for women who aren't severe PMS sufferers, the luteal phase of the cycle tends to be a more sort of kumbaya, let's watch, a movie by the fire kind of part of the cycle, where women do tend to feel more chilled out. But women, even during the follicular phase, when levels of progesterone are very low, their levels of allopregnanolone remain elevated relative to what you see in the pill takers.
So Sarah, in the future, do you guys watch TV in front of the fire? Is there like a hybrid fire television that?
Yeah. Are you also from the future? How did you know? So it all started with that Yule log. The Yule log.
Yeah,
and then some genius was like, "Hey, we could do this year round." And there you go. So
brilliant, but only at the right times in the cycle, right? So
right.
Well, not in the future, because in the future every day is the same, right? Because you're all on the pill.
Everybody.
And every day you need to watch a bigger and bigger fire because you're not getting the GABA thing.
Yeah, that GABAergic activity. Well, and then you also get this change to your stress response. So the research finds that women who are on the birth control pill also exhibit a diminished cortisol response to stress. And this is also something that is linked to symptoms that are similar to PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And so, and there's, I could get into a whole spiel on all of this and what it potentially means. But the sort of takeaway message from this is that women who are on hormonal birth control exhibit a blunted or absent cortisol response to stress. And this can make women less able to cope with stress, and less able to learn from their stressful experiences. And none of these things are good for mood, and none of these things, of course, are good for anxiety levels. And this is also believed to be something that might play a role in the mood-related changes that we see in pill-taking women, right? But this isn't where it all ends, you guys. So the pill, just like everything else, has an extended phenotype, sadly. And so the zombification effects of hormonal birth control actually end up not only being something that impact women, but it's something that has an impact on men.
Now, Sarah, this idea of the extended phenotype, right? This goes all the way back to Dawkins, and this notion that genes don't just have an effect on the organism that possesses them, but can actually have an effect on organisms that are outside of the sort of physical boundaries, right? So it's kind of like one of these early zombification ideas, right? That genes have this extended phenotype, and in the case of hormones, they also can have an extended phenotype in this sense.
Yeah. I think that all medications probably have an extended phenotype. And which is sort of a wild thing to think about. But and I can tell you a crazy story about antihistamines at some other point. But women, when they get zombified by birth control, so it causes these changes in women, right, where their mood changes, their desire to have sex changes, this and their hormones change. This ends up having an important impact on men, right? And for the first impact that it has on men is that, if it's given that the hormonal birth control can turn women into sort of depressed and anxious zombies, right? This is not going to motivate men to want to have sex with them, right? So that's like the first piece of it. But it goes even deeper than that. And that's because research suggests that men might actually calibrate their levels of testosterone to levels of estrogen that they sense from women. So the idea is this, right? Sex hormones are expensive to produce, right? And so men, given that, the process of evolution by natural selection rewards behaviors that result in gene transmission, men are hypothesized to sort of, calibrate how much they invest in testosterone production based on women's levels of estrogen, because of course higher levels of estrogen are associated with the periovulatory phase of the menstrual cycle, which is the time at which women can get pregnant. And so the idea is that men should increase testosterone production in response to women's levels of estrogen. And there's been some empirical support for this, right? So this was a study that was done by John Maynor and Saul Miller, where they had people sniffing t-shirts, and they had the men sniffing t-shirts that were worn by ovulating women, t-shirts that were worn by non-ovulating women, and then some t-shirts that were just taken straight out of the bag. And what they found was that men, their levels of testosterone were higher after smelling the t-shirts worn by the ovulating women relative to the levels that were found with these other things. Now, I will say that there was some other research that failed to find this effect, but that doesn't help make my point, so I'm not going to cover it in the context of this talk. Just saying that the caveat is that this has since been found. But let's just stick to the results that we did find, right? So if it's true, right, because of course we do know that evidence or absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? So let's assume that men may change their levels of testosterone in response to the levels of estradiol that women are producing. If you have a woman who goes on hormonal birth control, right, that of course means that her levels of estrogen are going to be incredibly low, right? And so what that means is that over some time, and in the future, where again, I am, and I'm reporting this to you from there, that's exactly what has happened. So women are all on hormonal birth control, and men they've just stopped, producing testosterone altogether, deciding that it's just not worth the investment.
So this raises a lot of questions, which I would love to ask soon. We have a few more correspondents that I think we're going to need to bring on in a minute, but I would love to talk about sort of also the societal implications of whether or not we want to lower or raise testosterone, and also the costs about, because it seems like there's still some pros, I think, to birth control, perhaps. I think it'd be worth discussing.
Yeah. So let me just like close this by saying this, right? That this isn't about, we should abandon the birth control pill. Instead, it's about consensual zombification, right? So this idea that if we're going to be zombified, if women are going to be zombified by the birth control pill, they should know what they're getting into and the trade-offs that they're making. I don't think that we should have any non-consensual zombification. And so really it's just all about making sure that women have all of the information that they need, and increasing the amount of research that's being done into the zombification effects of the birth control pill. So that way any zombification that does occur is something that's done with the woman's consent, knowing that that's what's happening.
That makes sense. We actually, I believe, have a guest coming up that may be zombified, right, Athena?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. We'll see you back on Late Night Brains, and if you want to stick around in the studio, we'd love to have you for however long you're available. Thank you again.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
This was super interesting. Thank you.
All right. Now, we all know that the transition between being a human and a zombie can be challenging, affecting everything from how you walk and talk to how you socialize with your friends. But did you know that being a zombie also can have really substantial effects on your sexuality and sexual preferences? Katya Cunningham has secured an exclusive interview with the recently zombified Summer Mengelkoch. Katya, thank you for being here with us. And Summer, it's delightful to have you here as well. Katya, I'll let you interview Summer now, providing us this exclusive interview.
Great. Hello, I'm Katya Cunningham, a research correspondent with Undead Live. Now, as widespread looting and public panic are well underway, one unfortunate outcome of the recent zombie apocalypse has been a shortage of many medications. From insulin to aspirin, antibiotics to antacids, pharmacy shelves are barren. One additional pharmaceutical that is now in short supply is hormonal contraceptives. Now, prior to the event, millions of women all over the world were using hormonal contraceptives, allowing them to take control of their fertility. Hardest hit by this shortage are those who are taking hormonal contraceptives to control medical disorders like PCOS and endometriosis. However, less is known about how this widespread shortage of hormonal contraceptives is impacting everyday women. Beyond the chance of becoming pregnant during these uncertain times, there may also be more widespread effects on women all over the world. Today we have Summer Mengelkoch here to help us explore this issue a little bit more. In the before times, Summer was a researcher who investigated the impact of hormonal contraceptive use on women's cognition, perception, and stress responses. Due to her recent zombie status, she's been unable to complete her work. However, she does have some fascinating insights to share with us today from the work she began before the collapse of society, which is especially relevant now that women can no longer expect reliable access to hormonal contraceptives. Hi, Summer. Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about the work you began prior to the apocalypse?
Hi, Katya. Yeah, thank you. So prior to the apocalypse, I had begun working on a project to better understand what happens to women's libidos or sex drives when they were on compared to off of hormonal contraceptives. Now, doing research on the impact of hormonal contraceptive use during a zombie apocalypse has been nearly impossible. As Katya mentioned, hormonal contraceptives are pretty hard to come by these days, and most people won't come within 50 feet of me since I've become a zombie. But it was difficult in the before times too. See, it's kind of unethical to randomly assign one woman to take a hormonal contraceptive and another to take a placebo. And as such, it's kind of difficult to untangle the impacts of taking a hormonal contraceptive from the impacts of other variables like relationship status, sexual activity, a desire for control, for example, and how these things can affect women's behavior. So accepting this, a lot of studies instead just look at correlational relationships between women's hormonal contraceptive use and various different outcomes. And some such studies have found that women taking hormonal contraceptives report a decreased sex drive compared to women who are not taking hormonal contraceptives. And we call these women naturally cycling women. So the fact that hormonal contraceptive use is associated with a decreased sex drive is a bit ironic, as one of the main reasons that women begin taking hormonal contraceptives is to allow them to have sex without the possibility of becoming pregnant. But in my study, we were specifically interested in what happens when women stop taking hormonal contraceptives. So do we see a return to normal with women reporting increased sexual desire after they stop taking hormonal contraceptives? So we didn't find a sample of women who were coming off hormonal contraceptives that were okay with being randomly assigned to either continue taking their hormonal contraceptives or switch to a placebo. But we were able to gain access to a sample of women who were just coming off of hormonal contraceptives on their own. So while it's not a perfect sample, it's interesting for two reasons. So first of all, it's somewhat naturalistic, and it's drawn from women all over the United States of various ages, instead of just being a study on college students. So the results of the study should be somewhat applicable to women who are stopping their hormonal contraceptive use in the real world. And it also gets around this issue of survivorship bias, which is pretty common in hormonal contraceptive research.
Mm-hmm. And what is survivorship bias?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So in general, research on hormonal contraceptive use is done using women who are taking hormonal contraceptives. So if the method of hormonal contraceptive or birth control that you're using works really well for you, you're likely to stay on that method for a pretty long time. But if the method doesn't work that well for you, you're likely to only be on the method for a short period of time. And what this means for research is that any random sample of women who are using a method of hormonal contraceptives is likely to be disproportionately made up of these women for whom the method works really well for. And so that means that the women being studied are the women who experience the least negative side effects, or who tolerate really well the negative side effects of their hormonal contraceptive method of choice. And this skews our information about how hormonal contraceptives impact women towards the experience of these women who who tolerate the side effects really well. And these could include side effects, for example, like a decreased sex drive. And so here, by collecting a sample of women who are discontinuing their hormonal contraceptive use, we have the opportunity to collect data that's going to be more representative of women who tolerate the side effects of their hormonal contraceptive method of choice less well.
Wow. Well, that seems like a great approach to researching the impact of hormonal contraceptives on women's behavior. And how did you gain access to the sample of women?
Yeah, we partnered with this cool app called Natural Cycles. So users of this app are naturally cycling women who are using cycle tracking and basal body temperature to track their fertility across their cycles. Some of the women who are using this app are using it to help them to conceive, and others are using it to avoid pregnancy. For our data collection, Natural Cycles sends women who are just getting off their method of birth control and on to Natural Cycles a survey when they sign up for the app. Then they complete a follow-up survey 3 months later, which allows us to look at differences both within and between women in their reported sex drive immediately after ceasing their hormonal contraceptive use, and again 3 months later. So far, we have collected time 1 data from about 300 women, and we've started getting responses for time 2 as well, just before the apocalypse happened here. So we're also collecting data to see if women's relationship status, how attracted she is to her partner, and if she met her partner on or off of hormonal contraceptives influences these relationships. Results will reveal if discontinuation of hormonal contraceptives leads to an increase in women's sexual desire, and how this is impacted by relationship status and other individual differences.
What a cool use of technology. Now, I'm interested in that last comment you made about the relationship between hormonal contraceptive use and women's sex drive being dependent on their relationship status. How would you expect relationship status to impact the expected increase in libido?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be the case that this effect is stronger in single women than it is for women in relationships, but the research really indicates that this is going to depend upon a few factors. So generally, women who meet their partners when they're naturally cycling tend to report higher sexual desire towards their partners when they go off of hormonal contraceptives, especially if they find their partner to be really attractive. And then women who meet their partners when they're on hormonal contraceptives tend to report lower sexual desire towards their partners when they go off of them, and especially if they find their partners to be less attractive. So it could be the case that women in relationships with people that they find less attractive or that they met while they were on their hormonal contraceptives might report less sexual desire when they stop using hormonal contraceptives compared to women who find their partners to be very attractive or who met them when they weren't taking hormonal contraceptives.
How interesting. So now that we know a bit more about your research, could you explain how the results of the study apply to the current zombie apocalypse situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we know, women no longer have reliable access to hormonal contraceptives. And as such, many women all over the world have now ceased their hormonal contraceptive use. And based on the initial results of our study, we're expecting to see an increase in women's sex drives, which is going to influence the sexual strategies of both men and women. And while some of the current conditions might lead one to expect that women might be having less sex right now, for example, due to increased disease risk, increased zombie risk, concerns about bringing children into a zombie-filled world, we'd actually predict that the unpredictability of the current environment, coupled with women's increased sex drive, is going to lead to more sexual desire in women and therefore more sexual activity.
And what have your experiences been as a zombified woman? Have you ceased your hormonal contraceptive use?
I have. So I actually ceased my hormonal contraceptive use just before becoming zombified, and I definitely noticed an increase in my sexual desire. Although recently this has been somewhat dampened by my intense desire to consume brains. At first, I was hopeful that my increased sex drive might prove valuable as a tool for seeking both sex and brains, as healthy men have been known to risk a great deal for sexual access to receptive women throughout our history. But to date, both myself and the other horny zombie women that I've spoken with have struggled with keeping the desire to eat brains in our pants, so to speak, and it seems to be putting off potential partners. That or the declaim flush thing. It could go either way. But my point is that as more and more women, zombified or not, come off of their hormonal contraceptives, it's likely that we're going to continue to see an increase in women's sex drives. And the impact that this will have on traditional mating strategies will be of keen scientific interest throughout the apocalypse.
Well, thank you, Summer, for taking time away from your fervent search for sex and brains to speak with us today. And thank you all for tuning in during this difficult time. So we'll now welcome some questions from our viewers. Back to you, Athena and Dave.
Thank you, Katya and Summer. That was really fascinating. We do have a lot of questions from the audience. So one of them is about the effect of quarantine, because, with the zombie apocalypse happening as it is, many people are not going outside and not interacting with others. Carlo Maley is asking, how does quarantining affect sex drive?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's certainly, I'm sure there's going to be, proper data to come out on this soon. Some people have found that people are actually having less sex right now because, they're not going out and meeting new people. And then also because they're around their partners all the time, if they have a partner at home, that they seem to be, somewhat less sexually active because they're not going out and doing other things. I could probably go on a long rant about how important it is to go out into the world and see other people and things like that to a healthy sexual relationship. But I don't have data to back that up.
All right. One final question for you. Dave, would you like to jump in?
Oh, I mean, all I keep thinking as I'm hearing this is I'm thinking back on my past relationships and thinking about which ones my partner was on hormonal contraceptions and which ones they weren't, and what that meant about the relationship and my attractiveness to them, where I'm like, oh geez, if they were on the pill, does that mean they weren't really? I guess that's the question, is if you're a guy and you're dating a woman who's on the pill, does that mean she's not really into you? That would be my question. That's
Summer.
I don't think it means that she's not really into you, right? But it might mean that she doesn't want to have your babies.
Interesting.
So there's a kind of a difference thing there in the kind of person that you want to build a life and have a partnership with, and then the kind of person that you want to, get their sperm and their genes and create babies. So women tend to be attracted to different types of men for different functions like that. So if you met them on the pill, they might have been more interested in you as a person and a partner and a life partner and things like that, but less interested in your genetic material.
Summer, one last question for you, which is, as you know, somebody who has recently been zombified, do you have advice for our viewers? You know, if you know maybe they're humans now, maybe they're already zombies, but if they're humans now, it's possible at some point in the future they will become zombified. What sex advice do you have from the zombie perspective?
Yeah, I think it's good to just come up front if you're using dating apps, for example, and just go ahead and mention your zombie status. People are going to notice it right away if you try to meet up with them. And I've slowed down, so I'm not usually able to like catch up with people who run away from me. So it's better to just be upfront from the get-go if you're trying to, you know, find yourself some sex and or brains out there in the online dating world. And mixed success, but you know, put it out there.
Thank you, Summer. That's great advice. Summer and Katya, thank you both so much for joining us today on Undead Live. And next, we're joined by our mating correspondent, David Buss, to give us some perspectives on mating and the apocalypse and the zombification of issues around mating. David, welcome to Undead Live. So tell us, how is the zombie apocalypse changing the landscape of mating, both for humans and for zombies?
Oh boy, that's a complicated question. I don't have all the answers. Don't even have partial answers. But for one thing, I mean, I think the this whole issue of birth control pills and how it's affecting sex drive, sexual attraction, sexual behavior is really quite fascinating. And I don't know if all of your wonderful speakers and interview people have left this platform, but one of the things that I was wondering is let's say women on birth control pills, according to Sarah, are more likely to get depressed. Which is really quite a stunning thing. But then I'm thinking, well, then doctors will prescribe SSRIs for the depression, for a symptom of the birth control. And SSRIs, at least my understanding is that they are known to interfere with things like also sex drive, but also the attachment system. And so I'm wondering what this kind of combination of drugs, the pills plus the SSRIs, how those are going to combine to influence female psychology, as well as Sarah was saying, the extended phenotype of those drugs into male sexual psychology.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that adds a whole other layer of zombification into the picture, right? I mean, if you're going on hormonal birth control and then the symptoms of that require you to have additional medication, it's just layers upon layers of medication and zombification. And certainly should be, it's an area that we should understand and do research on in order to get a handle on what might be happening.
Yeah, I wonder if Sarah has examined that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Sarah, if you're able to join us back in the studio, we could bring you on with David to discuss briefly. But I can bring Katya back in if she has any perspectives on this question. Katya, do you have any thoughts about these issues about sort of layering medications on top of birth control and what the implications of that might be?
I can't speak too much to that exactly, but this kind of highlights the whole issue with hormonal contraceptives, in that it's just completely understudied. A lot of time people avoid looking at these issues because it's just hard to control for these kind of individual differences. So I think overall, I don't even know if that's been looked at.
Yeah, very important issue.
Another kind of question that I had, and you asked how these things are affecting. I think we have to look at the menu of mating strategies that humans have, and how the zombie apocalypse and how these different hormonal contraceptives and SSRIs are affecting all the different mating strategies, because we know that people have at a minimum long-term pair bonding, short-term opportunistic mating, affairs, mate switching, etc. And so, so there's Sarah back on. Great. So hoping, Sarah, you can answer some of these interesting questions.
Yeah.
Should we go back, Athena, to that one about the first issue?
Yeah, you bet. So
Let's see
Sarah, we're talking about this issue of overlaying antidepressants on top of birth control, and we're hoping you might be able to give us some context about that. Is that something that happens, and what are the implications?
Oh yeah, no, it was funny because I was in my kitchen. I was like chopping up a snack, and I was like, oh, I've got to jump in on this. Put my snack aside and jump back on here. I think it's super duper fascinating, and I don't have any research on this. I do know that the rate of at which women are prescribed antidepressants is greater subsequent to having been prescribed hormonal birth control. So if you look at the rate of women who are prescribed antidepressants and look at it among women who are on hormonal contraceptives versus not, the rate is higher for the pill takers. So that suggests that there's like a large portion of women who are on antidepressants are being doubly zombified. And I would imagine that this is not good for sexual functioning at all, because we know that sexual functioning can be inhibited both by the hormonal profile created by hormonal birth control, but then also, of course, by the SSRIs, as David had indicated. And so this combination of things, I think, could like totally, sound the death knell to a woman's.
It's like a double whammy.
Yeah, exactly, like a double whammy of that, and it's also really interesting with the attachment system that you'd mentioned, David. And I'm not real sure. I'm not really aware of the research on antidepressants with the attachment system, but there's two really good, well done studies now. Linking hormonal birth control pill use with disruptions in oxytocin signaling, which I find just like really, it's fascinating. It's also really terrifying when you think about the first thing that doctors do when you get back, after you've had a baby, you go to the doctor's office and they say, how are you protecting yourself against pregnancy? And the thing that they try to do usually, even if you're breastfeeding, because I breastfed both my kids and I was put on the mini pill, which is a progestin-only birth control pill. And of course, the oxytocin system is critical to bonding between a mother and a newborn. And so to get disruptions in that system, and what they find with the pill takers, by the way, is that essentially, like if you give a pill taker some intranasal oxytocin, and then show them a photo, like what normally happens if you give somebody a intranasal oxytocin and you show them a photograph of their romantic partner, like their brain explodes into happiness, and the reward centers of their brain light up. And for pill takers, what they find is that there's no relationship. So you give them oxytocin and nothing happens in their brain when they're looking at a picture of their romantic partner. And so this suggests that there's something going on with that system. And the idea that something like that could also be going on with mothers and their newborn babies when they're being given hormonal birth control right after the birth is something that is really worth looking into. And in particular, then if you're mapping, layering on top of that antidepressants, I mean, who knows?
Yeah. Sarah, we had a question from Carlo asking if, antidepressants actually then inhibit sex drive even further, or, what are the implications of that layering for sex?
Right. No, that's really interesting, because if you already aren't having sex or wanting sex, and then you get put on antidepressants, which make you want it even less, maybe it means that you try to discourage other people from doing it too.
Well, and at that point, you don't even need to be on birth control in the first place because you're not having sex.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's so funny because the very first type of hormonal birth control I was on was, I won't say what it was, but it had that effect on me where it made me an emotional basket case, and also it made me just not want to have sex at all. And so I was like convinced for a really long time that the mechanism of action for birth control pills was making you unfuckable, and then also
All right.
So let me ask real quick. I know we will have two more people, but because I know Carlo asked, do depression or antidepressant inhibit sex drive more? But it's sort of this question that I was going back to earlier of, if we leave these things, even if we leave people completely unmedicated, and then we just allow people to have babies and babies and babies, what are the societal pros and cons of that? And do they, you know what I mean? Do they outweigh, or do the benefits of taking everyone off the pill at the societal level, does that outweigh the sort of costs of, you know, in terms of population, in terms of life history, you know? I think, what do you guys think? Do we want everybody just running around horny all the time, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all the men in the room say yes. I mean, look, I think, and I make this very clear in my book, and I think that for a lot of women, hormonal birth control is still the best option that we have in terms of safely and effectively managing, fertility. And so I don't think that it's something that it's like in society's best interest that everybody discontinue this, because some people aren't going to be, you know, tolerant of things like the copper IUD, or not able to effectively do things like the fertility awareness method. And if they're trying to not get pregnant, obviously, I mean, that's like a big deal. So,
So your whole thesis is really, it's not that birth control, that there's anything inherently wrong about it, but just that we should have the ability to choose freely by really understanding what the effects are of being on birth control.
Yeah, informed consent. I mean, essentially that we should understand how it works and what it does, and that not having that information, either not being given the information, and also just like the state of science right now being so, you know, ignorant of the way that hormonal changes change women, is something that we need to really rally against.
Just a minor comment on Dave's question about population. I mean, many countries are actually on the brink of just the opposite, that is below replacement level. So many Western European countries, for example, are looking at negative population growth. So in terms of like having this massive explosion of babies, it might actually be a good thing for some countries in some situations.
To have people go off the pill, and so interesting.
Yeah. That's. I mean, I think Japan. I could be wrong on this. Either Japan or China. I don't have my facts straight on this, but is actually trying to pay people to have more babies. That's because things are getting desperate in some of these countries with respect to too low a population replacement.
Wow, interesting. We do have somebody with a more non-medical way to make people sexier, possibly.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Again, David, our mating correspondent. I'm going to put you guys backstage. You can stay with us if you like. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Yes. So now we're turning our attention to perhaps one of the most important questions of our apocalyptic times. Dave, do you want to take us?
I mean, so the big question is, do tattoos make you sexier? And we've got Christopher Dana Lynn joining us to answer this question. So we're going to bring you on here. Christopher, are you there?
Oh,
hello. Hey.
You're probably wondering what I'm doing on the floor.
Yeah, what are you doing on the floor?
I'm tattooing fruit, of course.
So what do they say? It's a little hard to see on Zoom, but did you tattoo words on those fruit?
Well, of course, this one says zombie apocalypse medicine meeting. And on the back, I've got mommy on the zombie. And the banana bruises easily, but this was a prototype. So, but these fruit are officially undead, so this won't hurt it.
Interesting. Now, the big question is, will it make the apples and bananas look sexier now that you're tattooing them?
I don't know, but I will tell you later if it's tastier, because this is my lunch.
There you go.
Well, Christopher, thank you so much for joining us here on Undead Live. Could you tell us a little bit about this question of, what's the relationship between tattoos and sexiness and health?
Yeah, well, sure. I'm a biocultural medical anthropologist. I wave fruit around and study tattooing and immune function. And this is my research team, we're at the forefront of tattoo research, an important but under-recognized avenue of science during the zombie apocalypse. So how can tattoo research possibly help during a zombie apocalypse? I hear you all asking that in your heads. Or is that just the sound of the zombies moaning in the hallway again? Well, Exhibit 1. Exhibit 1 is a photo of Zombie Boy. Zombie Boy is sadly deceased in 2018. Zombie Boy was not a zombie, but a human.
Okay.
There we go. A human tattooed as a zombie. Exhibit 2. Thank you, Vanna. Exhibit 2, Rob White of the band White Zombie, wearing a Night of the Living Dead t-shirt, but he is also a mere human with tattoos. Exhibit 3, this gentleman is encountering real zombies with tattoos and appears to be about to die himself. So how is one to know what is a human tattooed as a zombie versus a zombie with tattoos, and how to avoid the latter? Well, one possibility is to avoid anyone with tattoos. However, 1 in 3 Americans has a tattoo nowadays. Furthermore, while past psychological studies of tattooing as indicative of personality traits associated with tattooing, they associated tattooing with the type of risky behavior that might result in death, or, of course, then zombification. Recent studies indicate that people only see tattoos on the face or the neck or poorly made and visible prison tattoos as suggestive that a person is dangerous. In fact, if a person works in industries where looking cool adds value to a job, having visible tattoos is a big bonus. So how do we keep zombies with tattoos not only from eating our brains, but from taking our jobs as bartenders, bouncers, and baristas? I have studied tattooing locally here in Alabama, across the US, and in the Samoan Islands in the South Pacific to be able to answer this important question for all of us. My team and I have been busy, and we have examined the influence of tattooing on the immune system. And in 3 different contexts now, we found that the immune system adapts to tattooing. So what does that mean? I compare it to exercise. If you're a living human and go work out, you may feel awful and sore the first time or two, and even feel sick afterward. But if you keep it up, your body adapts. This is basic biological stress response at work. When your body encounters a new stress, you produce cortisol and mobilize for fighting or fleeing. I recommend fleeing if it's zombies stressing you out. Cortisol is commonly termed a stress hormone that, among other things, helps suppress other functions that are not essential during an emergency, such as immune response, which comes afterward. However, if this is how one's body behaved every time we exercised, of course, we get sick every time too. So instead, our body adjusts to stressors it encounters regularly. One of the interesting things about tattooing is that it's been practiced all over the world and for a very long time. So Exhibit 4.
Oh, bringing that up right now.
This is a tattooed mummy, not a tattooed zombie. Don't worry, you don't have to run. More commonly known as Ötzi, with the umlauts over it. He died around 5,200 years ago and has 61 tattoos. Wait, six? Never mind. I'm just a tattoo artist. I don't know. That's the oldest example we have, but his tattoos appear to be therapeutic as they align with acupuncture spots, which means the knowledge of therapy and tattooing were already developed over a longer period of time. Tattooing has been practiced in times and places without antibiotics. So we ask, Why would people purposely put themselves in danger of becoming zombies or even merely dead? It's possible that tattoos, like exercise, actually show off how fit or healthy you are. So fit for what, you might ask? That's $1 million question. One study found that tattooed men are more bilaterally symmetrical, measured as fluctuating asymmetry. This finding suggests that healthier people maintain symmetrical growth on both halves of their body through development. Higher levels of bilateral symmetry have been associated with attractiveness, intelligence, leadership skills, and other positive traits. Those researchers suggest that such symmetrical men use tattoos to draw attention to their attractive phenotypes. Based on these data, we'd expect not just that tattooed people have better symmetry, but that highly fit people would have more tattoos. So we surveyed nearly 7,000 undergraduates across the US to compare intercollegiate athletes who are generally more fit than non-athletes and asked both about their tattooing and piercing, as well as any related medical complications. And we found that tattooing rates are pretty similar between the athletes and non-athletes in general, but when separated by self-reported gender, male athletes are more likely to be tattooed. Football players in particular have more tattoos, and they're kind of a big deal down here in Alabama, so put a pin in that. And athletes are less likely to have tattoo-related medical complications. Furthermore, we found a positive association between BMI and tattoo-related medical complications, suggesting that tattoos can show off a fit phenotype, but backfire in other circumstances. Now, let me qualify that finding by noting that all kinds of body types can survive the zombie apocalypse. There's not a one-to-one correlation between body size and tattoo complication. And don't forget that I work in Samoa, where large bodies is the norm, and those large bodies are disproportionately represented among the very fit people in the US military and the NFL. Fitness takes many shapes and sizes, which brings me to what I'm doing now on the floor. As an anthropologist, the main way I do research is through participant observation. I spend a lot of time watching tattooing and talking to tattooists in the US and in the South Pacific. Samoan traditional hand tap artists sit on the ground like this while they tattoo, which involves its own degree of pain and endurance for those unaccustomed like me. They use an owl like this to tattoo. I was given this owl to practice on myself because I've been experimenting with needles and inks to better understand what makes a tattoo heal nicely and look good, and what can make a tattoo heal poorly and look bad. I'm working on the fruit today because I'm running out of space on my legs. Also, Samoan style tattooing hurts so much, I haven't worked up the nerve to do it on myself. But I'm also trying to understand tattoo blowout, which seems to happen when there's too much alcohol mixed with the ink. Alcohol helps ink penetrate dermal cells, but too much allows it to spread out into the surrounding cells and results in a halo effect like I've got going on around mine. What does all this mean for being able to tell a human tattooed as a zombie from a zombie with tattoos? Well, one, tattooed people no longer look bad to us. They look good. In fact, they may look super healthy and attractive. Tattooed zombies, no offense, Summer, they kind of look gross and frankly unattractive, even with tattoos. Two, an infected tattoo is different from an infection on a tattoo. Believe me, I've seen both, and I've actually had multiple infections on my tattoos. No, not from my experiments, but as it turns out, I have a bad reaction to fire ant stings on the tattoos on my legs. Three, and finally, a well-made tattoo on a healthy person will heal and look vibrant. A zombie with tattoos, as we have seen, will have flesh falling off and the tattoo will look bad. And again, apologies to your previous guest, but they'll also smell worse. So I hope these tips are helpful in helping you tell humans from zombies. Good luck out there, people.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was excellent. And we now need to turn our attention to another important question, which is, why is the zombie apocalypse happening? You've heard of viruses potentially causing the ZA. You've wondered whether memes or social media might be taking over your brain. Heck, you've probably even considered the possibility that prions are behind the zombie apocalypse. But new work from immunologist Esther Borges Florsheim suggests that allergens may be to blame. Esther, thanks for coming on the show to talk with us about your work.
Thank you, guys. Let me start sharing my screen. It's much more interesting than looking at me. All right. So my name is Esther, and I'll show you part of the research I was developing in a place once called Yale University. And this was before the apocalypse. But as you know, of course, we had this apocalypse like many decades ago. But what our team found before those times is still relevant for us to think about and understand how this world, including how Zach, Nara, and Juan got zombified. So the stories we hear, as Athena
Esther,
pointed
we don't
out,
see your slides yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see. All right. Here we go.
Thank you for
Do you see
pulling
this
those
now?
up for us. Excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please push play. Okay.
All right, I'll start again then. But as you already heard me, that's exactly what I'm interested in studying, is thinking back from all this research that we had done before the apocalypse and trying to figure out exactly this question, right? Like, what caused this apocalypse? And it's assumed, here's Zach, Nara, and Juan again to introduce you. I'll go back at them to see what they had individually and how they got zombified. So again, the stories that we hear all assume that the apocalypse was caused by a virus. However, this time was not a virus, and we can almost be very sure of that. It was things like peanuts, like eggs, like shellfish, soy, and milk and tree nuts, and other things that we usually call allergens. And they did that with the help of your immune system. Your own immune system, which deployed of antibodies and immune cells that was supposed to defend you, I guess, right? That's why we have immune system. So let's take a look of what your immune system actually does. So at first, yes, you guys are right. This immune system was trying to protect you. After all, it evolved to promote appropriate defenses when you are in a negative environment full of pathogens and toxins, as shown here, like viruses and bacteria and parasites and venoms and worms. However, so all these things trigger immunological defenses. And the idea of these defenses is to protect you against this noxious stimuli. But these defenses themselves can get out of control and they can become exacerbated. In this case, it's your own immune response that is the source of the disease. And we know some examples of this phenomena, such as sepsis and autoimmune diseases, and including allergies. This is what we think happened in the apocalypse, all right? Your immune system became a zombie and decided to do something in your environment, and decided that something in your environment, for example, your food or something in the air, was your enemy. For example, your food, in this case, like peanuts. So the first times that you had this particular food, you didn't feel anything. You thought you were okay, but your immune system did. And for the next few weeks, there was this defense strategy. The defense strategy was to activate this antibodies and make antibodies and activating cells that could specifically recognize that potentially dangerous food, just in case you would encounter that enemy again. And years later, you did encounter that again. You ate that thing again, and you didn't think there was any problem. After a few bites, your mouth started itching. then your lips got swollen, you felt very dizzy, your blood pressure dropped, and you felt your throat closing. And luckily, your friend quickly realized that you were having an anaphylactic shock and saved you with an anti-zombie medication, or how people used to call this back in the day, an EpiPen. So this time you survived and your reactions completely disappeared, your allergic reactions, but not without leaving behind a persistent fear and anxiety. And this suggests that maybe your allergic reactions had some effects in your brain. Is that even possible though? Well, if you think about it, every time that you get sick from an infection, you change your behavior, right? You sleep a lot more, you don't want to eat, you feel very tired. And allergens can also do that to you. And because it makes you feel sick too, it induces, for example, avoidance behavior or aversion, which is a great strategy in order to defend you, because then you're going to remember that thing right away and be able to defend yourself and remember. So we can simulate this phenomena in mice to study how allergies can induce changes in behavior. And by using a very simple behavior test called the two-bottle preference test, we showed that control non-allergic mice preferred the food or drink containing the protein over water if they had a choice. Of course, it's way more interesting than their regular water or food. It's like giving you a peanut butter. If you're not allergic to peanuts, of course, you're gonna like that. However, if mice were made allergic to that specific protein before this test, they would refuse to drink or eat that protein, which suggests that they had developed this avoidance behavior or food aversion to that particular protein. And even more interesting is that mice that were allergic but had no specific antibodies or no specific immune cells in different strains of mice that we used, they now behaved like control mice, which means that instead of avoiding the allergen solution, they actually liked it. And they didn't care to consume that food, even though it would make them feel sick later. So in other words, they became zombie rodents. So this suggests that those antibodies and cells were not only responsible for this almost fatal anaphylactic reaction, but also for developing aversion and anxious behavior to that food. Now you guys might ask us, like, wait a second, you're, Esther, telling me that our immune system is directly impacting our brains and influencing our choices. Okay, but if that's true, then brains from an allergic mouse should be different than a control, unsensitized, unallergic, right? That's correct. And indeed, when we analyze their brains of the allergic ones and the control ones, they had different areas that were activated compared with the controls. And we can quantify these regions. They are shown here in different colors. We can quantify, and each of this dot is like an activated neuron in different areas. So what we are suggesting is that in response to a variety of external stimuli, the immune system can directly connect with neurons that will bring this information from this noxious substance to the central nervous system. And that will trigger specific and appropriate behaviors that in a normal condition evolve to protect you. It's a defense. So that also means that the immune system can function in a very similar way as the classic neuronal sensory system work, for example, olfaction and vision and so on. So like these other sensory systems, the immune system can also recognize environmental stimuli, in this case, some chemical substance, and transmit this information to the central nervous system through sensory neurons. And this will impact behavior. So what happened then in the apocalypse is that somehow, that's our hypothesis, perhaps new allergens manipulated our immune system to get access to our brains. In Zach's case, it started as an atopic dermatitis. Nara's diagnosis was asthma. when she was just a kid. And Juan developed food allergies. So all these allergies went out of control and turned them into immunological zombies. And there are hundreds of millions of these stories, and the incidence of allergies continue to increase everywhere globally since the apocalypse. The only thing that will save us from a complete immunozombie apocalypse collapse is to understand how the immune system evolved to protect you and how it influences behavior so we can manipulate those pathways. So,
Thank you. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Esther. This is a really intriguing perspective on the immunological zombie apocalypse. I would never have thought that asthma could be a symptom of potential zombification. And thank you all.
I have asthma, so I kind of could see it.
Thank you all for joining us for the afternoon edition of Undead Live. Tune in to Dr. Zed coming up next here on Channel Z. And remember, the best way to protect your brains in the zombie apocalypse is to share them.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.